Jake Martinez stepped off the transport ship and looked around at the biggest space station he had ever seen. The Galactic Military Academy stretched out in all directions, with metal walls that sparkled like stars. Ships from dozens of different worlds came and went through the massive docking bays. Jake carried one small bag with everything he owned. He was 19 years old and had never been off Earth before. The artificial gravity felt lighter than home, making each step feel like he might float away. The air smelled different too, clean and recycled without the familiar sense of Earth's forests and oceans. Other cadets moved around him in the main corridor. Most of them were not human. Jake saw his first alien up close, a tall reptilian creature with scales that changed color as it walked. The being was at least 8 feet tall with arms as thick as tree trunks. It glanced down at Jake and made a sound that might have been laughter. "You must be the human," the reptilian said. Its voice was deep and rough. "I am Krax of the Karathi Empire. I heard they were letting primitives join the academy now." Jake had been warned about this. Humans were new to galactic society. Most aliens thought Earth was too dangerous for intelligent life. They called it a death world because of the radiation, gravity, weather, and thousands of species that could kill humans in creative ways. "Nice to meet you too," Jake said. He kept his voice calm even though his heart was beating fast. Krax walked away, still making that rough laughing sound. Jake continued down the corridor until he found his room number. The door opened automatically when he approached. Inside, he found a girl about his age unpacking her things. She had dark hair and was shorter than Jake. She looked up when he entered. "You must be my roommate," she said with a smile. "I'm Lisa Grant from California. Let me guess. They told you that you're the first human combat cadet?" "Something like that," Jake said, dropping his bag on the empty bed. "Are you in the combat program too?" "Engineering," Lisa said. "I've been here for 6 months already. Fair warning. Most aliens think humans are either crazy for living on Earth or too weak to matter. Sometimes both." Jake sat on his bed and looked around the small room. 2 beds, 2 desks, a small window showing the stars outside. It was simple but clean. "What's the combat program like?" he asked. Lisa stopped unpacking and gave him a serious look. "Tough. Each species has natural advantages. The Karathi, like Krax, are incredibly strong and their scales can stop energy weapons. The Zilani are living crystals who can reshape their bodies into weapons. The Vorthak are hive minds that think faster than any individual. And then there are dozens of other species with their own special abilities." "What about humans?" "That's what everyone wants to know," Lisa said. "Humans are good at solving problems and we don't give up easily. But in terms of raw physical abilities, we're pretty average compared to most galactic species." Over the next few days, Jake attended orientation sessions and met his instructors. The academy trained the best warriors from across the galaxy. Each species sent their most promising young soldiers to learn from each other and compete in various challenges. The academy's commander was Admiral Thexvor, a being with 6 arms and skin that looked like polished metal. During the welcome ceremony, he spoke to all the new cadets. "You represent the finest your species have to offer," the Admiral said. "Here you will learn that strength comes in many forms. Some of you rely on natural weapons. Others depend on superior technology. A few have psychic abilities. But the greatest warriors understand that adaptation and intelligence matter more than any single advantage." Jake noticed that when the Admiral's 4 eyes looked at him, they seemed curious rather than dismissive. The real challenge came a week later. Admiral Thexvor announced the annual tournament that would take place in 2 months. Each species would select 1 cadet to represent them in single combat. The winner's species would get priority placement in the elite Galactic Defense Corps. "This tournament has been held for over 300 years, the Admiral explained. "It tests not just combat skill but courage, strategy, and the ability to adapt under pressure. Any cadet may volunteer to represent their species." Jake felt every eye in the room turned toward him. He was the only human combat cadet. If he didn't volunteer, humanity would have no representation in the tournament. That evening, Lisa found him in the Academy's observation deck, looking out at the stars. "You're thinking about volunteering," she said. "It wasn't a question. Someone has to," Jake replied. "If I don't, it'll be another 50 years before humans get another chance." "Jake, I've been running the numbers. In 300 years, no species has ever won the tournament in their first attempt. Most need several generations just to place in the top 10. The competition is designed for species with natural combat advantages." Jake turned to face her. "What would you do?" Lisa was quiet for a long moment. The same thing you're going to do, she said finally. But that doesn't make it any less dangerous. These aren't human opponents who fight like you do. Each species has evolved completely different combat styles based on their physical abilities. Some can literally reshape their bodies into weapons. Others can manipulate energy or gravity. But they've never fought a human before either, Jake pointed out. That's true, Lisa said. Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world. Only 43 planets in the known galaxy rank higher for hostility to life. Most aliens can't understand how humans survived there, let alone develop technology and spaceflight. The next morning, Jake stood before Admiral Thexivore in his office. The walls were covered with displays showing combat techniques from hundreds of different species. Cadet Martinez, the Admiral said. I assume you're here to volunteer for the tournament? Yes, sir. Are you aware that the average tournament competitor has at least 50 pounds of muscle mass over the largest human? That many species have natural armor, weapons or abilities that no human possesses. Yes, sir. Admiral Thexivore studied Jake with all four eyes. Why do you want to do this? Jake thought about Earth. The storms that could level cities, the animals that hunted humans for sport, the diseases that had killed billions before medicine conquered them. He thought about growing up in a world where everything was trying to kill him. Because I'm human, sir, Jake said. We don't know how to quit. The Admiral made a sound that might have been approval. Very well. You have 2 months to prepare. I suggest you use them wisely. As Jake left the office, he felt the weight of an entire species' reputation on his shoulders. But for the first time since arriving at the academy, he also felt excited. Earth had prepared him for challenges that these aliens couldn't imagine. The tournament would show the galaxy what humans were really made of. Jake spent the next 3 weeks studying every piece of combat footage the Academy had in its databases. The library's computer system contained recordings from previous tournaments going back 2 centuries. He watched the same fights over and over, taking notes on fighting styles, weaknesses, and patterns. His main instructor was Sergeant Alex Stone, a human military veteran who had arrived at the Academy just 1 month before Jake. Stone was in his 40s with gray hair and scars that told stories of battles on distant worlds. The first thing you need to understand, Stone said during their morning training session, is that every species here evolved to fight in completely different ways. Humans developed boxing, wrestling, and martial arts because we're all basically the same size and shape. These aliens don't have that limitation. They were in the Academy's main training facility, a huge room with adjustable gravity and atmosphere controls. Stone had set it to Earth normal, giving Jake a small advantage during practice. Tell me about the favorites, Jake said, wiping sweat from his face after an hour of combat drills. Stone pulled up a holographic display showing the tournament brackets from previous years. Krax is the Karathi representative. His species are natural warriors. Their scales can deflect energy weapons and their strength is about 3 times human average. They also have retractable claws that can cut through steel. The display showed footage of Krax fighting another cadet. The reptilian moved surprisingly fast for his size, using his claws and tail as additional weapons. His opponent, a humanoid with blue skin, couldn't get close enough to land any effective strikes. Next is Zilneth from the Zilani Collective, Stone continued. Crystalline life form. They can reshape their body into blades, hammers, or shields. Their silicon-based biology makes them nearly indestructible to conventional attacks. Jake watched Zilneth's previous fights with growing concern. The crystalline being could literally turn their arms into swords that were harder than diamond. In one fight, they had reshaped their entire torso into a massive shield that absorbed energy blasts without showing any damage. How do you hurt something made of living crystal? Jake asked. That's what we need to figure out, Stone said. The good news is that your friend Lisa has been helping with research. She's been analyzing combat data looking for patterns that others might have missed. The display changed to show Rexthol, a being that looked like a massive jellyfish floating in a personal atmosphere bubble. This one comes from a gas giant. They can manipulate atmospheric pressure to create shockwaves. The atmosphere in their bubble is poisonous to most species, so getting close is dangerous. Jake had never seen anything like Rexthol's fighting style. The creature could create focused pressure waves that hit like invisible hammers. In one tournament fight, they had knocked an opponent unconscious without ever making physical contact. And this is Hive Unit 7742, Stone said, showing footage of an insectoid creature about Jake's size. Don't let the size fool you. The Vorthak share a collective consciousness. This individual is connected to millions of others who are analyzing the fight in real time and providing tactical advice. Jake watched the Vorthak fight with perfect technique. Every move was precisely calculated. They never made mistakes because an entire civilization was helping them think through each decision. I have one advantage, Jake said after reviewing all the footage. None of them have ever fought a human before. That's true, Stone agreed. But it also means we don't know how effective human combat techniques will be against non-human physiology. Your boxing training teaches you to target specific points on a human body. These aliens don't have the same vulnerable spots. Over the following weeks, Jake's training intensified. He sparred against holographic simulations of different alien species. The computer programs were based on actual combat data, so they fought exactly like the real opponents he would face. The results were not encouraging. Jake lost every single match. Against the Karathi simulation, his punches barely registered on the creature's scales. The simulated cracks could grab Jake with one hand and throw him across the room. Jake's speed advantage meant nothing when his opponent had twice his reach. The Zalani simulation was even worse. Jake couldn't find any way to damage the crystalline structure. Every attack bounced off harmlessly, while the simulation reshaped itself into increasingly dangerous weapon configurations. After a particularly brutal session against the Vorthak simulation, Jake sat on the training room floor feeling frustrated and exhausted. "I'm not strong enough," he said to Stone. Maybe Lisa was right. Maybe no species can win in their first generation. Stone sat down next to him. "You know what I noticed about all those fights you just lost? That I got destroyed every time?" "You never made the same mistake twice," Stone said. "The first time the Karathi simulation threw you, you were surprised. The second time, you were already rolling when you hit the ground. By the 10th time, you were using the throw to your advantage." Jake thought about this. It was true that he had started adapting to each opponent's tactics, but not fast enough to win. "Human beings are the most adaptable species in the known galaxy," Stone continued. "We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us in new ways every day. Weather, predators, diseases, natural disasters, Earth never gave us a break. So we learned to adapt faster than any other species." That evening, Jake met Lisa in the Academy's computer center. She had been working on her own analysis of the tournament data. "I found something interesting," she said, pulling up charts and graphs on her workstation. "Most species rely heavily on their natural advantages. The Karathi almost always open with the same intimidation display. The Zalani have 3 basic weapon configurations they use in predictable patterns. But they're still winning," Jake pointed out. "Because their opponents are also predictable," Lisa said. "Everyone fights the same way their species has always fought. No one tries anything new." She showed Jake a detailed breakdown of fighting patterns. Each species had developed combat styles over thousands of years based on their physical advantages. These styles were incredibly effective, but they were also inflexible. "The Vorthak might have a million minds helping them think," Lisa said, "but they're all thinking the same way. They optimize their strategy based on known variables. But humans are an unknown variable." Jake stared at the data, beginning to understand what Lisa was suggesting. "You think I should fight unpredictably?" "I think you should fight like a human," Lisa said. "Every other species here evolved in relatively stable environments. Earth was never stable. Humans learned to adapt because our survival depended on it. Use that." Over the remaining weeks of training, Jake changed his approach. Instead of trying to match his opponent's strengths, he focused on being unpredictable. He mixed techniques from different Earth martial arts in combinations that had never been seen before. When Stone ran him through the simulations again, Jake started performing better. Not because he was stronger or faster, but because the computer programs couldn't predict what he would do next. "The simulations are based on historical combat data," Stone explained. "They're programmed to respond to known fighting styles. But you're creating something new." Jake's confidence began to grow. He still lost most of his simulation matches, but he was lasting longer and landing more hits. More importantly, he was learning to think differently about combat. The night before the tournament began, Jake stood again in the observation deck, looking out at the stars. Lisa joined him there. "How do you feel?" she asked, scared, Jake admitted, but also excited. "Tomorrow the galaxy finds out what humans can do. Win or lose, you're making history," Lisa said. "No human has ever competed at this level before." Jake nodded. He thought about Earth. about all the humans who had survived impossible odds throughout history. Tomorrow he would represent all of them. The tournament would begin in 12 hours. Jake was ready to show the galaxy that humans belonged among the stars. The grand arena was bigger than any stadium Jake had ever seen on Earth. 50,000 spectators filled the seats, representing dozens of different species from across the galaxy. The arena floor could change into any environment using advanced holographic technology and force fields. Jake stood in the preparation area with the other 15 tournament competitors. Each represented the best young warrior their species had to offer. Most of them were larger than him. All of them had natural abilities that humans lacked. The tournament bracket was displayed on a massive screen above the arena. Jake had drawn a first-round match against Veltar, a competitor from Arios Prime. The planet had low gravity, so its people evolved to be incredibly fast and agile. "Nervous, Deathworlder?" Krax asked, approaching Jake with that rough laugh. "I almost feel sorry for you. This tournament has been running for 300 years. No species has ever won on their first attempt." "There's a first time for everything," Jake replied calmly. Krax's scales changed to a darker color, which Jake had learned meant amusement. "Your species will learn their place soon enough." Lisa found Jake before his first match. She handed him a small communicator that would let them talk between rounds. "Remember what we discussed," she said. "Don't try to match their strengths. Use your adaptability." "I will," Jake promised. Admiral Thexfor's voice echoed through the arena as he announced the beginning of the tournament. "Today we witness the finest young warriors in the galaxy. May each competitor fight with honor and show us the true strength of their people." Jake's first match was called. He walked out onto the arena floor as the environment changed around him. The setting became a rocky landscape with multiple levels and obstacles. It was designed to give both fighters equal advantages. Veltar was waiting for him in the center of the arena. The alien was tall and thin with long limbs and large eyes adapted for low light conditions. In Arios Prime's weak gravity, Veltar could probably jump 50 feet. In the arena's Earth-normal gravity, he was still incredibly quick. The match began with a sharp tone. Veltar immediately demonstrated his speed advantage, moving around Jake so fast he was almost a blur. The alien landed quick strikes from different angles before darting away. Jake tried to follow the movement but couldn't keep up. After 2 minutes, Jake was breathing hard while Veltar seemed completely relaxed. The crowd was murmuring, probably discussing how quickly the human would lose. But Jake was doing something that no previous opponent had managed. He was learning Veltar's movement patterns. The alien was incredibly fast, but speed required predictable physics. There were only so many ways to approach from each angle. Jake stopped trying to track Veltar's position and started predicting where he would be. When the alien came in for another quick strike, Jake was already moving to intercept. He caught Veltar's wrist and used the alien's own momentum to throw him to the ground. The crowd noise changed. This wasn't supposed to happen. Veltar recovered quickly and changed his strategy. Instead of hit-and-run tactics, he started using the rocky terrain to his advantage, jumping between different levels to attack from above. Jake had never fought in 3 dimensions before, but he adapted again. He used the terrain defensively, positioning himself so that Veltar could only approach from predictable angles. When the alien jumped down from a high ledge, Jake was ready with an uppercut that connected solidly. Veltar staggered but didn't fall. The alien's natural physiology was tougher than it looked, but Jake could see uncertainty in those large eyes. Veltar had never faced an opponent who adapted this quickly. The fight continued for another 5 minutes. Jake took more hits than he gave, but each exchange taught him something new about his opponent. By the end, he was anticipating Veltar's moves before the alien made them. The final exchange came when Veltar tried his opening strategy again, rushing in for a quick strike. But Jake had learned that pattern 8 minutes ago. He sidestepped, grabbed Veltar's extended arm, and used a simple hip throw to slam the alien onto the rocky ground. Veltar didn't get up. The arena was completely silent for a moment. Then the noise exploded as thousands of spectators tried to understand what they had just seen. The human had won. Jake helped Veltar to his feet. The alien looked confused but not angry. "How did you learn my pattern so quickly?" Veltar asked. "I had a good teacher," Jake said, thinking of Earth and all the predators that had tried to kill his ancestors. Jake's second match was 3 days later against a heavily armored opponent called Rexnall from the Thorian Republic. Rexnell looked like a walking tank with natural plate armor covering most of his body. His species evolved on a world with massive predators, so they developed almost impenetrable defenses. The arena environment became a desert with scattered rock formations. Rexnell's strategy was simple: advance slowly and absorb any attacks while using his superior strength to overpower opponents. Jake's punches and kicks had no effect on Rexnell's armor. The alien barely seemed to notice them, but Jake didn't panic. He studied his opponent, looking for weaknesses. All armor had joints where the plates connected. Rexnell's knees, elbows, and neck showed small gaps where the natural plating didn't overlap. These were the targets Jake needed. The fight became a test of patience and precision. Jake spent 15 minutes dodging Rexnell's powerful but slow attacks, while landing precise strikes on the armor joints. Each hit was small, but they accumulated damage over time. The crowd watched with growing interest as Jake demonstrated tactics they had never seen before. Instead of trying to overpower his opponent, he was systematically finding and exploiting weaknesses. Rexnell began to slow down as the joint strikes took effect. His left knee wasn't supporting weight properly. His right elbow couldn't extend fully. When he tried to grab Jake, his movements were predictable and limited. Jake ended the fight with a combination that targeted 3 damaged joints in sequence. Rexnell tried to block, but his injured arm couldn't move fast enough. Jake's final strike hit the alien's neck joint, and Rexnell collapsed unconscious. Another victory that shocked the galaxy. Jake's third match was against a psychic opponent called Zekmor from the Psionic Collective. Zekmor could read thoughts and predict Jake's moves before he made them. This should have been an impossible match for any non-psychic fighter, but Jake had learned something about psychic abilities from Lisa's research. They worked best against organized, logical thinking patterns. Earth had taught humans to think chaotically when necessary. When the match began, Jake tried to clear his mind completely. Instead of planning his attacks, he let instinct and muscle memory guide him. He fought like he was responding to immediate danger rather than following any strategy. Zekmor's psychic abilities were useless against an opponent who wasn't thinking ahead. Jake's attacks came from pure reflex, impossible to predict because Jake himself didn't know what he would do next. The psychic fighter became increasingly frustrated as his main advantage disappeared. When Zekmor tried to overwhelm Jake with a mental attack, Jake did something the alien didn't expect. He smiled. Earth had given humans experience with pain, fear, and mental pressure that no other species could understand. Zekmor's psychic assault felt like a bad headache compared to what Jake's ancestors had survived. Jake won the third match with a simple boxing combination that Zekmor never saw coming. The semifinals would pit Jake against Zilneth, the crystalline warrior who was considered nearly indestructible. The entire galaxy was talking about the human who had fought his way to the Final Four using impossible tactics. In his preparation room, Jake received messages from Earth. Millions of humans were watching the tournament, cheering for someone they had never met but who represented everything they were capable of. Lisa arrived with more research about crystalline biology. "I found something," she said. "Crystals have resonance frequencies. If you can hit the right frequency, even the hardest crystal will shatter." "How do I find the right frequency?" Jake asked. "You'll have to figure that out during the fight," Lisa said. "But remember, you're not just fighting for yourself anymore. You're fighting for every human who ever survived the impossible." Jake nodded. Tomorrow he would face an opponent who could literally turn their body into weapons harder than diamond. But Earth had prepared him for challenges that seemed impossible. The galaxy was about to learn what humans could accomplish when everything was against them. The arena transformed into a crystal cavern for Jake's semi-final match against Zilneth. Sharp crystal formations jutted from the floor and walls, giving the crystalline warrior a significant home field advantage. The lighting reflected off thousands of surfaces, creating a dizzying array of colors and shadows. Zilneth stood in the center of the arena, their translucent body catching and reflecting the light. They were roughly human-shaped, but their entire form was made of living crystal that could reshape itself at will. Jake had watched hours of footage showing Zilneth's various weapon configurations, but seeing the real thing was different. The crowd was larger than ever before. Word had spread across the galaxy about the human who was fighting his way through impossible odds. Betting pools that had initially ignored humans entirely were now frantically recalculating odds. Admiral Thexvor announced the beginning of the match. Jake took a deep breath and tried to remember everything Lisa had taught him about crystal structure and resonance frequencies. The moment the starting tone sounded, Zilneth demonstrated why they were considered unbeatable. Their right arm flowed like liquid and hardened into a blade longer than a sword. The crystalline warrior moved with surprising speed for someone made of solid mineral. Jake barely dodged the first strike. The crystal blade cut through a rock formation behind him like it was made of paper. Zilneth immediately reshaped their left arm into a massive hammer and swung it at Jake's midsection. Jake rolled away, but the hammer strike sent rock fragments flying in all directions. Several pieces hit him, drawing blood. This was going to be much more difficult than his previous matches. Zilneth pressed their advantage, reshaping their weapons continuously. Blade to hammer to spear to shield. Jake had never faced an opponent who could literally become different weapons during the fight. Every time he started to adapt to one configuration, Zilneth changed to something else. For the first 5 minutes of the fight, Jake was completely on the defensive. He used every piece of cover in the arena, dodging between crystal formations while Zilneth systematically destroyed his hiding spots. Blood was running down Jake's face from multiple small cuts. The crowd was silent, expecting the humans' impossible tournament run to finally end. Even Lisa looked worried in the preparation area, but Jake was doing what humans did best. He was learning under pressure. While dodging Zilneth's attacks, Jake was studying the reshaping process. The crystalline warrior's transformations weren't random. There were patterns based on the geometric limitations of crystal structure. Certain shapes required more time to form. Others left temporary weak points during the transition. More importantly, Jake noticed something that Zilneth's previous opponents had missed. The transformations created vibrations through the crystalline body. Each reshaping sent small shock waves through Zilneth's structure as the crystal lattice reorganized itself. Jake started timing his movements to coincide with these transformation vibrations. When Zilneth changed from blade to hammer, there was a split second when their entire structure was in flux. Jake used these moments to get closer than any previous opponent had managed. His first successful hit came when Zilneth was reshaping both arms into defensive shields. Jake timed his approach perfectly and landed a solid punch to what would have been Zilneth's solar plexus if they were human. The strike shouldn't have done any damage. Jake hit nowhere near hard enough to crack crystal that was harder than diamond. But something unexpected happened. A visible crack appeared where he had struck, and it spread several inches before stopping. Zilneth looked down at the crack in surprise. In 300 years of tournament history, no one had ever damaged their crystalline structure with a simple punch. Jake had found something that Lisa's research had only hinted at. Crystals were incredibly strong when force was applied to their surface, but they were vulnerable to vibrations that matched their internal structure. The punch itself hadn't broken the crystal. The shockwave traveling through Zilneth's body had found a resonance point. Now Jake had to figure out how to do it again. Zilneth became more aggressive, reshaping into increasingly dangerous weapon configurations. They formed spikes along their arms and legs, making any contact potentially lethal, but they were also more cautious, trying to keep distance from the human who had somehow hurt them. Jake studied the crack he had created. It ran along what looked like a natural seam in Zilneth's crystal structure. Every crystalline being had these internal divisions where different crystal formations met. These junction points were the weak spots, but finding them required getting close enough to study Zilneth's structure while avoiding weapons that could cut him in half. Jake started using the arena's crystal formations differently. Instead of just hiding behind them, he used them to create multiple angles of approach. The breakthrough came when Zilneth tried to corner Jake against a large crystal wall. The crystalline warrior reshaped both arms into massive war hammers and attacked with overwhelming force. Jake did something that looked like suicide. Instead of dodging away from the attacks, he dodged toward them. He slipped between Zilneth's arms as they came down, ending up close enough to touch the crystalline warrior's chest. Jake could see the internal structure clearly now. Multiple crystal formations joined together in complex patterns. There were seam lines everywhere, but most were too deep inside Zilneth's body to reach, except for one. A major junction point was visible just below where Zilneth's left shoulder would be if they were human. Jake struck the junction point with a simple palm strike, putting all of his remaining strength behind it. The hit was perfectly timed with one of Zilneth's transformation vibrations. The shockwave traveled through the crystalline structure, hit the junction point, and resonated. Cracks appeared across Zilneth's entire left side. The crystalline warrior staggered backward, their left arm losing cohesion and crumbling partially. The arena crowd erupted. No one had expected to see the seemingly indestructible Zilneth taking serious damage, but Zilneth wasn't finished. The crystalline warrior's remaining arm flowed into the largest blade configuration Jake had seen. They raised it overhead for a strike that would end the fight instantly. Jake was exhausted, bleeding from dozens of cuts, and had no energy left for complex tactics. As Zilneth brought the massive crystal blade down, Jake did the only thing he could think of. He stepped forward instead of back. The move put him inside the blade's arc, too close for the weapon to hit him effectively. At the same time, it brought him within range of Zilneth's damaged left side. Jake grabbed the crystalline warrior's shoulder with both hands and used every remaining ounce of strength for one final strike. He drove his knee into the largest crack in Zilneth's structure. The resonance effect was immediate and devastating. The crack spread rapidly across Zilneth's entire body. The crystalline warrior's form lost stability, and they collapsed to the arena floor, their consciousness retreating to their core crystal in defeat. Jake stood over his fallen opponent, swaying on his feet. Blood was running down his face and arms from numerous cuts. His uniform was torn and his knuckles were raw from hitting crystal. The arena fell completely silent. 50,000 spectators stared in absolute shock at the impossible scene before them. The human had defeated Zilneth, the warrior who had been considered unbeatable for the past 5 tournaments. Jake looked up at the crowd and managed a weak smile. "Earth teaches us to find the cracks in everything," he said, though his voice was too quiet for anyone but the nearby sensors to pick up. Medical teams rushed onto the arena floor to treat both fighters. Zilneth's crystalline form was already beginning to regenerate, but it would take hours for them to fully recover. Jake's cuts looked worse than they were, but he had pushed his body beyond its normal limits. As the medical team worked on him, Jake saw Lisa running down from the preparation area. She reached the arena floor just as the medics finished cleaning his wounds. "How did you know?" she asked. "How did you know which frequency would work?" "I didn't," Jake admitted. "I just kept hitting until something broke." Lisa laughed despite her worry. "That's the most human answer possible." Jake was helped off the arena floor to prepare for the finals. In 2 days he would face Krax, the massive Karathi warrior who had been guaranteed to win the tournament before Jake's impossible run began. The galaxy was watching now. This wasn't just about a tournament anymore. It was about whether humanity belonged among the stars, and whether the most dangerous thing in the universe might be a species from a world that never stopped trying to kill them. Jake had one more fight to prove that. Earth's children were ready for anything the galaxy could offer. The day of the finals arrived with more spectators than the grand arena had ever hosted. Ships from across the galaxy brought representatives from species who wanted to witness what many were calling the most important tournament in 300 years. The human who had defeated impossible odds was now facing the ultimate test. Jake stood in his preparation room, looking at messages from Earth. Billions of humans were watching, united in support for someone who represented their entire species. Lisa sat nearby reviewing the final data on Krax's fighting style. "He's everything you're not," she said quietly. "Massive, armored, incredibly strong, and backed by a warrior tradition that goes back thousands of years. The Karathi have won this tournament more than any other species." Jake nodded. He had seen enough of Krax's fights to know that the reptilian warrior was genuinely terrifying. Krax stood 8 feet tall with scales that could deflect energy weapons. His claws could cut through steel and his tail could shatter bone. More importantly, Krax was smart and experienced. "But he's never fought a human," Jake said. "That's our only advantage," Lisa agreed. "Everything else favors him completely." Sergeant Stone arrived to help Jake with his final preparations. The veteran looked serious but not worried. "How do you feel?" Stone asked. "Terrified and excited," Jake admitted. "This is what we came here for." Stone smiled. "Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Excitement gives you courage. You'll need both today." The arena transformation for the finals was spectacular. The environment became a volcanic landscape with rivers of lava and intense heat that would favor the heat-loving Karathi. The temperature was set to levels that would be uncomfortable for most species but perfect for Krax. Jake felt the heat hit him as he walked onto the arena floor. Sweat immediately began forming on his forehead. This was another disadvantage to add to all the others. Krax was waiting in the center of the arena, his scales glowing red-hot from absorbing the volcanic heat. The massive reptilian looked like a demon from ancient human mythology, his yellow eyes fixed on Jake with predatory focus. The crowd noise was overwhelming. Every seat was filled, and millions more were watching across the galaxy. Admiral Thexfor's announcement echoed through the arena. The final match of the 300th tournament, representing the Karathi Empire, 5-time Academy champion Krax. Representing humanity, first-time competitor Jake Martinez. The contrast between the two fighters was stark. Krax looked like he had been designed for combat. Jake looked like he had wandered into the wrong competition, but Jake had learned something important during his impossible tournament run. Appearances meant nothing. What mattered was adaptability, intelligence, and the willingness to endure whatever was necessary to win. The starting tone sounded. Krax opened with a roar that was designed to paralyze prey through fear. The sound echoed off the arena walls and hit Jake like a physical force. Most opponents would freeze or retreat from that intimidating display. Jake smiled. He had grown up on a planet where everything tried to kill humans in creative ways. He had survived storms that could level cities and predators that hunted his species for sport. A loud lizard was not going to scare someone whose ancestors had faced down saber-toothed tigers and ice ages. Krax's expression showed surprise. In his experience, that roar caused immediate psychological damage. But the human seemed completely unaffected. The reptilian warrior adjusted his strategy and attacked with overwhelming physical force. His claws left gouges in solid rock where Jake had been standing milliseconds before. His tail strikes created craters in the volcanic stone. Jake employed every tactic he had learned: mobility, timing, adaptation. But Krax was different from his previous opponents. The reptilian warrior learned from each exchange and began cutting off escape routes. His superior reach kept Jake at a distance where human combat techniques were less effective. For the first 10 minutes of the fight, Jake was completely outmatched. He took several glancing blows that would have seriously injured a human opponent. Krax's claws left shallow cuts across Jake's ribs and arms. The heat was making him dizzy and his movements were becoming sluggish. But then Jake did something that fundamentally changed how the galaxy viewed humans. Instead of trying to avoid all of Krax's attacks, he started taking calculated hits. When Krax swiped with his claws, Jake didn't dodge completely. He let the claws rake across his ribs in exchange for getting inside Krax's guard, where he could land a solid punch to the reptilian's knee joint. When Krax's tail came around in a sweeping strike, Jake didn't jump over it. He absorbed the hit across his shoulders and used the momentum to spin into an elbow strike against Krax's hip. The crowd realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. The human was consciously choosing to take devastating damage in service of a larger strategy. This wasn't berserker rage or species-specific ability. This was calculated, intelligent sacrifice for tactical advantage. Krax began to show signs of unease. In Karathi culture, an opponent who stopped trying to avoid death had already lost their sanity. Warriors who couldn't feel pain properly were considered dangerous and unpredictable. But Jake wasn't insane. He was thinking more clearly than he ever had in his life. Earth had taught him that survival sometimes required accepting damage to prevent worse damage. Every human alive was descended from ancestors who had made similar calculations. The accumulated damage to Krax's joints was beginning to show. His left knee wasn't supporting weight properly after Jake's repeated targeted strikes. His hip movement was restricted from the elbow strike. Most importantly, his confidence was shaken by facing an opponent who fought unlike anything in his experience. Jake pressed his advantage by becoming even more unpredictable. He mixed techniques from boxing, wrestling, martial arts, and street fighting in combinations that had never been seen before. When Krax expected a punch, Jake delivered a kick. When the reptilian prepared for a grappling attempt, Jake struck with his elbows and knees. The crowd was on its feet, watching a style of combat that challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare. The human wasn't trying to match his opponent's strengths. He was creating entirely new rules for the engagement. Krax, despite his warrior's pride, was becoming desperate. He increased the power of his attacks, putting more force behind each strike. But Jake adapted to the increased aggression by accepting even more damage in exchange for better positioning. The final exchange came when Krax, frustrated and slightly afraid, committed everything to a massive overhead strike designed to end the fight instantly. Both claws came down in a coordinated attack that should have torn Jake's head from his shoulders. Jake didn't dodge. Instead, he stepped forward inside the strike's arc and delivered the most basic punch in human combat, a simple uppercut that his boxing training had made automatic. The timing was perfect. Jake's fist caught Krax at the exact moment when the reptilian's claws would have connected. The punch landed just under Krax's jaw, at the one point where his scales didn't overlap completely, with all of Jake's remaining strength, plus the momentum from Krax's own downward strike. The massive reptilian warrior collapsed instantly. Unconscious before he hit the ground, the arena fell completely silent. 50,000 spectators and billions more across the galaxy stared in absolute silence at the human cadet standing over the greatest warrior the Karathi had ever produced. Jake was bleeding from dozens of wounds and swaying on his feet, but he was standing. Jake looked up at the stunned crowd and spoke in a voice that carried across the arena's sound system. Earth sends its regards. The silence broke. The crowd erupted in a noise that had never been heard before. Species from across the galaxy cheering for a human. The impossible had happened. The Deathworld Cadet had won the tournament that no species could win in their first attempt. Jake collapsed to his knees as exhaustion and pain finally overwhelmed him. Medical teams rushed onto the arena floor while Admiral Thexford declared him the tournament champion. As the medics worked on his injuries, Jake saw Lisa running toward him with tears in her eyes. Behind her came Sergeant Stone and dozens of other humans who had been scattered throughout the academy. "You did it," Lisa said, kneeling beside him as the medics checked his wounds. "You actually did it." "We did it," Jake corrected. "This was never just about me." Admiral Thexford approached with the tournament trophy, a crystal sculpture that represented 3 centuries of galactic military tradition. As he placed it in Jake's hands, the Admiral spoke quietly. "In 300 years, I have never seen anything like what you accomplished today," he said. "Your species has much to teach the galaxy about warfare, survival, and the true meaning of strength." Jake looked around at the crowd still cheering for him. Representatives from dozens of species were standing and applauding. The galaxy's understanding of humanity had changed forever. "We're not special," Jake said to the Admiral. "We're just from Earth. Our planet taught us that survival requires adaptation, intelligence, and the willingness to endure whatever is necessary. Every human carries those lessons." Within hours, news of Jake's victory had spread across human space. Humanity's application to the Galactic Defense Corps was not only approved, but fast-tracked. The phrase Deathworld Cadet became